The world was still recovering from the devastation of World War I. The conflict had left deep scars on the landscape and in the hearts of millions. Cities lay in ruins, and countless lives had been shattered. The war had not only taken a toll on the soldiers who fought in the trenches, but also on the civilians who endured the bombings and the loss of loved ones. Yet even as nations tried to heal, the seeds of another global conflict began to sprout. Political tensions simmered beneath the surface, and the fragile peace was threatened by unresolved grievances and emerging ideologies. The Great War, as it was then known, had left millions dead and economies in ruins. The battlefields were littered with the remnants of a brutal conflict, and the graves of soldiers stood as somber reminders of the cost of war. Europe in particular was struggling to rebuild. The continent faced immense challenges as it tried to recover from the physical and economic devastation. Cities had to be reconstructed from the ground up, and the economic hardship of the 1920s made this task even more daunting. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to ensure peace, instead sowed the seeds of resentment and instability. The treaty's harsh terms were meant to prevent future conflicts, but they had the opposite effect. The treaty placed harsh penalties on Germany, blaming them for the war and demanding crippling reparations. These reparations strained the already weakened German economy, leading to widespread poverty and suffering. This fueled resentment among the German people and created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The sense of injustice and humiliation felt by many Germans was exploited by radical groups who promised to restore the nation's pride and power. Meanwhile, the League of Nations, created to prevent future wars, proved ineffective. Despite its noble intentions, the League lacked the authority and military power to enforce its decisions. It lacked the power to enforce its decisions and failed to address the underlying causes of international tension. The League's inability to mediate disputes and prevent aggression undermined its credibility and effectiveness. The global economy, already weakened by the war, was further destabilized by the Great Depression in the 1930s. The stock market crash of 1929 sent shockwaves around the world, leading to mass unemployment and economic despair. Mass unemployment and economic hardship led to social unrest and political instability. People took to the streets in protest, demanding change and relief from their suffering. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, totalitarian regimes rose to power in Germany, Italy, and Japan, promising order and strength. Leaders like Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and the militarists in Japan capitalized on the chaos, offering simple solutions to complex problems. These regimes, with their aggressive expansionist ambitions, would ultimately plunge the world into another devastating war. Their quest for dominance and territorial expansion set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the globe and bring unprecedented destruction. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to bring lasting peace. The world had just emerged from the horrors of World War I, and there was a desperate hope that this treaty would prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. Instead, it became a source of deep resentment and instability. The treaty's terms were seen as punitive and harsh, especially by the German population, who felt they were being unfairly punished for a war that had many complex causes. The treaty's harsh terms, particularly those imposed on Germany, created a climate of bitterness and anger. The economic hardships that followed only deepened this resentment. Many Germans found themselves struggling to survive in a country that was once a proud and powerful nation. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, a clause known as the War Guilt Clause. This clause was particularly humiliating, as it placed the entire blame for the conflict on Germany's shoulders, ignoring the roles played by other nations. They were burdened with massive reparations payments, crippling their economy. The reparations demanded were astronomical, leading to hyperinflation and widespread poverty. The German mark became virtually worthless, and people were seen carrying wheelbarrows full of money just to buy basic necessities. The treaty also stripped Germany of significant territories and limited its military capabilities. Key industrial regions were taken away, further weakening the economy. The once formidable German military was reduced to a mere shadow of its former self, with strict limitations on the number of troops and types of weapons allowed. These punishments, while understandable from the victor's perspective, were seen as deeply unfair by many Germans. The sense of injustice was palpable, and it wasn't long before this collective anger began to manifest in public protests and demonstrations. They felt humiliated and betrayed. fueling a desire for revenge and revisionism. Conversations in cafes and public spaces often revolved around the perceived injustices of the treaty, and propaganda against it became widespread. This atmosphere of discontent was fertile ground for radical ideas to take root. This resentment created an opening for extremist groups, like the Nazi Party, to gain support. Adolf Hitler and his followers capitalized on the widespread anger, promising to restore Germany's former glory and overturn the Treaty of Versailles. Their message resonated with a population desperate for change. The treaty's impact extended beyond Germany. Across Europe, the redrawing of borders and the creation of new states led to political and social upheaval. The instability was not confined to Germany alone. It was a continent-wide phenomenon. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires were dismantled, creating new states with fragile borders and ethnic tensions. These newly formed nations often found themselves embroiled in conflicts over territory and governance, further destabilizing the region. The League of Nations, created to prevent future wars, proved powerless to address these underlying issues. Despite its noble intentions, the League lacked the authority and military power to enforce its decisions, rendering it ineffective in maintaining peace. Its failure to effectively deal with the economic crisis of the 1930s further eroded international cooperation and set the stage for another global conflict. The Great Depression exacerbated existing tensions as countries turned inward and adopted protectionist policies, leading to a breakdown in international trade and diplomacy. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to be a blueprint for peace, instead became a catalyst for another devastating war. The unresolved issues and lingering resentments from the treaty directly contributed to the rise of fascism and the outbreak of World War II, proving that peace built on punitive measures is often fragile and short-lived. In the aftermath of World War I and the Great Depression, a new threat emerged: totalitarianism. This ideology, characterized by absolute state control over all aspects of life, took root in several countries, most notably Germany, Italy, and Japan. These totalitarian regimes, led by charismatic but ruthless dictators, exploited the economic hardship and political instability of the time. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party rose to power by promising to restore national pride and prosperity. Hitler's ideology was based on racial superiority and territorial expansion, promoting hatred against Jews and other minority groups. In Italy, Benito Mussolini established a fascist state, emphasizing nationalism, militarism, and obedience to the state. Japan, under the increasingly militaristic government, pursued an aggressive expansionist policy in Asia, seeking resources and dominance. These totalitarian regimes, driven by their ideologies and ambitions, posed a growing threat to world peace. They engaged in aggressive military buildups, violated international agreements, and ultimately plunged the world into another devastating war. Their rise to power serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked extremism and the fragility of peace. The world watched with growing apprehension as the totalitarian regimes of Germany, Italy, and Japan became increasingly aggressive in the 1930s. These nations, driven by ambitions of territorial expansion and ideological dominance, began to challenge the fragile peace established after World War I. Their leaders, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Emperor Hirohito, each harbored visions of empire that would reshape the global order. The League of Nations, an international organization created to maintain peace, found itself weakened and divided. Despite its noble intentions, the League proved unable to effectively counter the expansionist ambitions of these aggressive regimes. Its inability to enforce collective security measures, or to present a united front against aggression, highlighted its limitations and foreshadowed the coming conflict. The spark that ignited World War II came on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. This invasion was a calculated move by Hitler, who sought to reclaim territories lost after World War I and to expand Germany's living space. The swift and brutal attack on Poland demonstrated the effectiveness of Germany's military strategy and the ruthlessness of its ambitions. This act of unprovoked aggression shattered the fragile peace that had held since the end of World War I. Polish cities were bombarded and civilians were forced to flee their homes, creating a humanitarian crisis. The world watched in horror as the full scale of Germany's military might was unleashed upon Poland, signaling the beginning of a new and devastating conflict. France and Great Britain, honoring their commitments to Poland, declared war on Germany 2 days later. This marked the official start of World War II, as the major European powers were now drawn into the conflict. The declarations of war were met with a mix of resolve and trepidation, as both nations prepared for the long and arduous struggle ahead. World War II had begun. The world was plunged into a conflict that would last for 6 years and involve nations from every corner of the globe. Soldiers prepared for battle, military vehicles rolled out, and the grim reality of war began to set in. The initial stages of the war saw rapid movements and significant territorial gains by the Axis powers. Germany's blitzkrieg, a lightning war strategy utilizing tanks and air power, quickly overran Poland. This new form of warfare, characterized by speed and surprise, overwhelmed the Polish defenses and left the world stunned by its effectiveness. The success of the blitzkrieg demonstrated the technological and tactical advancements that had been made since the last global conflict. In the spring of 1940, Germany conquered Denmark and Norway, then launched a surprise attack on France, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line. The rapid fall of these nations showcased the might of the German military and the weaknesses in the defensive strategies of the Allied powers. The bypassing of the Maginot Line in particular was a strategic masterstroke that left France vulnerable. Within weeks, France was forced to surrender, leaving Great Britain to stand alone against the Nazi war machine. The fall of France was a devastating blow to the Allies, and a significant victory for Germany. As German soldiers marched through Paris, the British began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the Axis powers, knowing that they were now the last line of defense in Europe. The Battle of Britain, a fierce air campaign waged in the skies over England, became a turning point in the war. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, launched relentless attacks on British cities and airfields, aiming to achieve air superiority and pave the way for an invasion. The resilience and determination of the British people, along with the skill and bravery of the Royal Air Force, played a crucial role in defending the nation. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, fought valiantly against the Luftwaffe, ultimately forcing Hitler to postpone his plans to invade Britain. The success of the RAF in the Battle of Britain was a significant morale boost for the Allies, and demonstrated that the Axis powers could be resisted. The downing of numerous Luftwaffe aircraft and the effectiveness of British anti-aircraft defenses were key factors in this victory. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan continued its aggressive expansion, setting its sights on European colonies in Southeast Asia. The Japanese military, emboldened by its successes in China and elsewhere, sought to secure vital resources and strategic positions. The expansion into Southeast Asia threatened the interests of the Western powers and set the stage for further conflict in the region. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, hoping to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and deter American involvement in the war. The attack was meticulously planned and executed, resulting in significant damage to the U.S. fleet and the loss of many lives. The shock and devastation of the attack reverberated across the United States and the world. The attack had the opposite effect, galvanizing American public opinion and bringing the United States into the war against the Axis powers. The nation, previously divided on the issue of involvement in the conflict, now united with a sense of purpose and resolve. The subsequent mobilization of American military and industrial might would prove to be a decisive factor in the eventual defeat of the Axis powers.